I'm going to moderate the next panel dedicated in the directly connected topics, which is all about net zero, carbon neutrality. So I will keep also you, Dominic, in this session, and welcome Satish Kumar Gupta, member of UNFCCC, international expert on carbon offsetting and reduction scheme, former deputy executive of Bureau of Standard in India. So very pleased to have you, Satish, on this specific session. We keep also on the line with Professor Xiaozhou Qi to highlight us after the great engagement in the United Nations last September 2020 by China to announce to the world his great plan to be net zero in 2060. So behind this, there is many transformation, and we could learn a lot from the Chinese policy to make it happen. I would like also to welcome Dr. Johan Nylander from Stockholm. He is a senior advisor on climate policies and carbon markets, now independent consultant advisor for organization. So welcome you also, Johan, from Stockholm. We would like also to welcome some people who are still connected, and we're going to make it as soon as possible and jump directly in the discussion. So to set the scene in this specific topic about carbon neutrality, how can we move forward from pledges to practice? There is very few standards to say how to become net zero, how to become carbon neutral, and what is the concept, what is the implementation behind the concept, behind the scientific purpose. That is all about in this session. Translate the concept in practice. And the pathway to make it are very different. It depends on your background activities, on the region, on your own mixed energies, and to keep in mind that there is one thing. We can't deal with net zero in a single part of the world. We can't deal to be net zero itself for a company or itself for a territory. It's coming to converge not only the point of view, but the ways to be net zero. That is all about. I would like to start first to introduce Mr. Satish Gupta from India to present yourself very briefly, just with 30 seconds and 1 minute, just to say to the world your background, and next jump in the first, we can say, bullet points that we would like to address.
Thank you, Fabric, for giving me the opportunity to join CPC. At the same time, you already introduced me as a UNFCCC member, CDM accreditation team, which was responsible for competence verification of DOEs, designated operational entities, which have been already in frame, and then they are given a certified emission reductions. They have been responsible for certified emission reductions in CDM. I am a man of standards. For the last 30 years, I've been working into the Bureau of Indian Standards. That's the national standard body of Government of India. And from there, I took a clue that, there is a adequate work to be done pertaining to the climate aspects, climate reduction, mitigation kind of things. So I became a member of UNFCCC CDM accreditation team for competence verification of DOEs who are responsible for certified emission reductions kind of criteria over there. So here there was an opportunity to audit at least 4 DOEs at different international level. I was a member of international community for UNFCCC. At the same time, then I took an opportunity to be a member verifier for airport carbon accreditation, which is responsible for many of the airports internationally for their level of accreditation, right from starting from mapping, offsetting, reduction, and then transformation. Then I became a member of CORSIA, Carbon Offsetting International Aviation, Carbon Offsetting and Reduction in International Aviation, that is CORSIA, and a verifier for EU MRV regulations for GHG emissions from maritime. Not only that, after that, the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, they made me a member for their working group for their verification part on the transparency of the NDC's documents which are coming from all over the world to them. So it came into my mind that transparency in NDC documents and the data which is being given to UNFCCC and all kind of pricing mechanism, whether it is a data which is verifiable, the data which is given to them is transparent, it is accountable, and whatever data is coming to them is pertaining to a particular standard. ISO has already published many standards in the series of ISO 14064. Part 1 is basically for quantification and reduction of GHG emissions. So I don't know whether many of the pricing market is considering those standards while calculating this actual carbon mitigation quantification on their part. But at the same time, it's the right time that we approach the ISO documents not only for quantification and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We always refer to many other standards which are product standards like ISO 37161, which is for smart community infrastructure, and there is a sustainable standards for even for solar heating 9459. We mentioned about renewable energy being substituted by a fossil fuel energy. There also we have a standard available ISO standard. ISO 2794914 is about CO2 capture. So all these standards are available. In ISO, there is a practice of voting whenever they make any clause pertaining to a particular kind of activity or the product kind of thing. They always vote in terms of and while taking a decision. But in India, we have a consensus approach. Whosoever is participating in our standard formulation activity, we see that there would be a consensus among all the stakeholders. Likewise, I would like to mention here is in our carbon pricing mechanism, which is globally applicable. I think the net zero, which is 2050, a global consensus is coming up saying that there would be a net zero by 2050. Here, it would be better if we take the carbon pricing mechanism as in a consensus basis. I mean to say that there are many developing countries who would be appreciating the idea for not for a long-term plan, but for a short-term plan, let's say for 5 years or 10 years, because to achieve a short-term plan, it is always better to achieve that short-term plan because we don't know how many of us will remain in another 30 years and for what we are going to leave for our next generation, which kind of sustainable kind of thing would be there. So it's a right kind of approach if we make a short-term plan and stick to that, and our carbon markets or carbon pricing mechanism is depending on the short-term plans out of those long-term plans. At the same time, there is a need to leave the challenging part on each and every country because all countries they have a different kind of challenging roles to play. They have some kind of social obligations with them. They have to provide education, health, and everything to all of their consumers. And we should see that how much intensive the carbon pricing is there. We cannot have the same kind of carbon pricing mechanism for all the countries taken together. There would be some countries who will be preferring the carbon pricing at a lower level, and they will be giving importance. Of course, importance has to be given, but at the same time, there would be it should be a country specific mechanism for carbon trading or carbon market thereof. So at apex level, I agree that there can be a guidelines published by a uniform approach through international standards globally through regulations which are coming in place to different countries. But at a country level, if we see that there are many challenges and the distribution of this carbon pricing, I should say this is a carbon liability rather. Carbon liability should be fixed at the individual country level and then it should be equitable and it should be fair. It should be the role should be given to each and every country that they are equitable and they are very much fair to that kind of thing. So
Okay.
here the no, I am not here to advocate this thing, but at the same time, it is our consensus approach which will help us in arriving at a decision about carbon pricing mechanism thereupon.
Okay.
Coming to the that ETS EU ETS scheme, there we have to see that many other sectors like marine sectors, aviation sectors have been left out. So in ETS scheme, if they include those two sectors, at EU level, so it would be nice enough for them to go for this. So each and every country has they are limited resources, they have a limited kind of thing. But for as far as our country is concerned, we have been, we have a national mission on climate change, which is operating since 2012, and under that mission we have many other many subheads under that like energy efficiency drives are there, and in energy efficiency drives we have many sectors, many sectors like cement, steel, all industry which are having more intensive kind of energy consumption. They have been asked, they have been set some targets over there, and internally we have performed achievement rate scheme, which is equivalent to that carbon rate scheme, and already that is in existence for the last 6 or 7 years. Effectiveness is quite great, and here there are many other things which would be taking place globally, and in India we would be able to achieve by 2030 much of our targets in advance. So though we don't want to make any commitment right now, but here there are likely chances that we would be meeting our targets before the timeline is there 2030. So please
About your already track record, your achievement for airplane transport and maritime implementation. How can we not only offset the carbon emission, the massive carbon emission by those industries, but also to find a way and to raise up, to incentive the new standards, not only to be a constraint for the players, but also to help them transforming when they have the carbon in the core business. It could be tricky for them with millions of employees behind those industry. So it could be painful if the transformation is too how can we say, too deep in a very short term. So standardization is very important. Convergence towards standardization is very important. I would like to let the floor to Johan Nylander to being back also from Asia to an EU or a Sweden perspective or reverse. Johan, probably yes, just introduce you briefly before and share with us what you've seen in the scene.
Thank you, Fabrice, and thank you to you and Sophie and the others for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I would like to bring out a little bit about the net zero targets and their relation to the Paris Agreement, and then a little bit about the role that carbon pricing can play to achieve net zero targets. So just to raise a little bit of a concern first, and that is that we all know that the Paris Agreement states that we should achieve a balance between emission sources and removals by the second half of this century. And obviously, carbon pricing is going to be a help in that, and I'll come back to that. But there will also be quite a demand for removals to achieve this balance for the remaining issues. And I think one of the challenges here will be to understand what the different organizations, companies, but not least the countries, to what extent they will account for removals in their objectives. And I think that there's can become a difficulty when we're trying to aggregate this and to assess this against the Paris Agreement objectives. And of course, the question sooner or later is going to be who will actually be able to claim all these removals. So they said, for instance, when approaching 2045 or 2050, countries are preparing their nationally determined contributions, and they will probably also account for removals to achieve net zero targets. What will be the space for other actors to claim removals at the same time? And this issue also becomes clear if you want to use carbon offsets for your net zero climate neutrality targets. Again, countries with ambitious nationally determined contributions, will they be able to issue and export climate carbon credits, carbon offsets to other actors when they at the same time need all the emission reductions they are making to reach their own targets? So that's just to raise this question. And I think in relation to Paris Agreement, we have what is called a global stock take. And this is an opportunity for countries to come together and look at their joint efforts to see and how we are reaching the Paris Agreement target. And it's been raised by several that this is going to be tricky because countries have different targets and they will report a little bit differently and with perhaps with different types of updates. And if we are to assess net zero targets as well and the progress against this may be even more difficult. So this is first just raising a question or an issue about how we deal with the net zero targets in relation to the tracking of progress against the Paris Agreement objectives. But the key here is, of course, carbon pricing. So I'll come back to that. And I think that net zero targets, to set these, could be relatively simple compared to implementing them. And this is, of course, because many of these targets are set quite long-term, 2050, even 2060. At the same time, we know that the Paris Agreement requires quite urgent action. So in this respect, I think the carbon pricing will play a very important role. At the same time, we hear arguments that carbon pricing is perhaps mainly about cost efficiency, etc. So it will not provide the transformation that is required. This could very well be true at the end of the day, but I think there's two factors that we need to look at in this case. And first of all is, of course, that carbon pricing is part of a policy package. So like any other one policy, it will not alone drive transformation. The second point is that to what extent carbon pricing instruments will be transformative has to do with political decisions. I mean, you can have an ETS imposed by a government that is quite aggressive in gradually putting more stringent caps. But at the same time, if a government does this, it has to be able to take the consequences of that as well. And this leads me to two observations that I will go through quite quickly. The first is that I think that as carbon pricing has to be more transformative, it will have more impacts on society. And this will increase or enhance the debate on how to use the revenues from carbon pricing. So I think it's easy when talking about carbon pricing to start to look at the different design elements. I think the discussion in the future more and more will be about how we use the revenues to create a just transition and to balance the impacts of transformation. The second observation is that this will vary very much between countries. And as Fabrice mentioned, I'll just very briefly juxtapose the EU and Southeast Asia, which is a region I've been working a little bit in. And to take an example, we have EU and its member states. We have a tradition of environmental legislation, high level of taxation in many countries. We have a liberalized electricity market, access to emission reduction technologies, opportunities to switch from coal to gas, solar power in Southern Europe, wind power in North and Northeast of Europe, knowledge and money to do waste incineration, etc., etc. So maybe not the emission trading scheme in Europe maybe was not that ambitious from the start, but certainly is now, and it has been implemented quite quickly and without quite a lot of opposition. If we look at other regions, if, for instance, in Southeast Asia, there are very different situations. The electricity markets are regulated. There's limited or no capacity to manufacture and develop renewable energy. There is not very much tradition of having, for instance, solar power at the utility level and make good earnings out of that. So, and here I will exaggerate a little bit, but just to show how carbon pricing needs to be part of a policy package. I mean, in a region such as Southeast Asia, a country may have to look at when it introduces a carbon price, and if this is strong in the beginning, it may lead to that coal plants have to shut down, and even coal mines reducing their business or closing. And this will mean loss of jobs, losses of incomes for households, both in the plants and the mines. It may lead to less power, electricity into the national grid. At the same time, the country would need to increase the share of renewables. It may need to import technology. It may need to modernize the electricity grid. It may need to build capacity to develop and manufacture renewable energy technology. It needs access to balancing power and storage, etc. At the same time, risks of electricity prices rising and gas prices also rising. You put this carbon pricing will become quite tangible for a large part of society. So in this context, carbon pricing is not enough. A country may have to look at its trade policy, its foreign investment policy, its R&D policy, its electricity market regulations, educational system, many things. And I'm not saying this to scare someone off to do carbon pricing, but I think the importance here that if carbon pricing is to achieve the transformation, it really has to be strong, and that will have impacts on society.
Yes, thanks Johan, for sharing this. It's all about a fair transformation by implementing those policy. And we know here in France that a fair transformation towards carbon pricing, toward carbon policy implementation is very, very important. We have to embed also the point that you have highlighted, Johan, is to have a public policy driven on the revenue collected, the tax collected, to move this fund, these public policies in the right direction. It's all about national implementation or geo-economic zone implementation. I would like to also have the point of view of Miguel Naranjo. Miguel, who is from UNFCCC, who is the program manager of carbon neutrality. Very pleased to welcome a representative of international bodies and to set the scene of what is carbon neutrality, Miguel, on your point of view, and how can we implement it in a distributed way, the best smooth, the best tailor-made to be net zero. Yes, please, Miguel.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, and thank you for the invitation to join you. Just to clarify, I coordinate the Climate Neutral Now initiative within the UNFCCC Secretariat, also known as the Climate Change Secretariat. Although carbon neutrality is a topic that is wider in the UN system, it's not me or our team defining what carbon neutrality should be or how it should be approached, but it's rather a broader conversation. So to answer your question, what is carbon neutrality? Okay, so this is a very interesting question because different organizations, and allow me 1 second to reduce the noise here, just a second. I hope that helps. So the carbon neutrality and other topics, other definitions around this topic are not universally agreed. So there are still different groups working on defining lexicon around this issue. On the one hand, for example, you have the Race to Zero, which is a campaign led by the Global Climate Action Champions of the UNFCCC. You also have the ISO working on the 14,068 carbon neutrality standard that, of course, has to have its own lexicon. And there are other science-based targets initiative and others working around this. And the definitions are not universally agreed. But in general terms, the consensus that seems to be emerging is when you say carbon neutral, it means that whatever you're talking about, an organization, an individual, an event, etc., is estimating its carbon footprint or GHG inventory. It's acting to reduce it, to avoid emissions. And finally, is compensating the emissions that have been produced with recognized or credible carbon credits. This is the concept or the understanding that seems to be emerging around the name carbon neutrality, which is not the same as net zero, which you might have heard as well. Net zero refers to achieving a real balance between the emissions that we produce and the removals or capture of those emissions. So it would not be enough to compensate with carbon credits from renewable energy, energy efficiency, or other types of projects. You would need to compensate them or actually neutralize them. It's the word that is being used. Really neutralize them, but by capturing an equivalent amount of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So these are the two main definitions that seem to be emerging for carbon neutral and net zero. Now to the second part of the question on our point of view on this topic, as I say, the conversation is still ongoing and it's a broader conversation even beyond the UNFCCC. But what is clear is we need to achieve global net zero emissions by 2050. This is the goal that it's included in the Paris Agreement, a global balance between emissions and removals of greenhouse gases, anthropogenic greenhouse gases. So that one is clear. At planetary level, by 2050 latest, we have to be net zero. Now, at the level of nations, organizations of different types, ideally, we should also aim to achieve that status of net zero by 2050, so that we are contributing to the global target. But this is a little bit more difficult because you will have organizations and sectors where reducing emissions completely or avoiding emissions completely will be very difficult or will take longer. So there needs to be some kind of allowance for compensation of emissions, in this case, neutralization of emissions, capturing emissions elsewhere, to compensate for the emissions that these organizations and sectors will not be able to avoid possibly by 2050. So in practice, what we need then is to develop technological solutions to capture CO2 and potentially other greenhouse gases as well, directly at the point where they're being generated, or to extract them from the air. These technologies are still not widely available and definitely not commercially feasible. And so we need to work a lot in developing them and making them economically feasible, economically attractive. Finally, nature-based solutions are also part of the equation. Protection and restoration of ecosystems of all kinds, both ocean ecosystems, forests, etc. This is key, not only because of the climate impact, but also because of the enormous biodiversity loss that we are seeing today, which is also unprecedented. But nature-based solutions alone will not suffice, will not be enough to ensure this global balance of emissions. And so we need to, yes, work to protect and restore all kinds of ecosystems, but in parallel, we need to promote the development of these negative emissions or CO2 capture technologies. Yes, and with that, back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Miguel, for sharing this overview, insight, and the way to implement the policies, and also the diversity of initiatives who are very flourishes. Now it's all about how can we converge. It's like an open do tank. Let's say an open do tank to match two things, like a race, and like to find his own way to be net zero. So let's back now to Dominique Vignon, from the French Technology Academy. According to your first introduction, Dominique, and to highlight the update carbon pricing strategy for higher carbon price. Now, when it comes to be net zero, do you think, Dominique, that carbon pricing policies is directly connected to a net zero policy? And what could the academy provide for the society to better understand? When it comes with the society, it comes from decision makers to the civil societies.
Well, thank you very much, Fabrice. It's a good question, which to some extent is a continuation of what Miguel just said. And let me first emphasize that net zero requires, as it was said, direct air capture. There are not enough natural sinks, as was said, and there are sectors which are very difficult to fully decarbonize, or even they are impossible. There is not only cement or steel where hydrogen can play a role, but an important sector which is often forgotten is aviation. There is a project for developing an hydrogen aircraft by Airbus, by the Airbus group. But when you look to the challenges, it is not really achievable. And even if it would be achievable, it will come too late because there is a need for developing prototypes, setting up a completely new infrastructure in the airports, etc., etc. And when you do the planning for such development, it will not come long before 2050, maybe in 2045. So, other things have to be done for those sectors, and the only possibility at the end of the day is offsetting the carbon emission with capture, either at the source, but unfortunately also with direct air capture, which means that it is expensive. It will be expensive. And this is not commonly said. I live in a country where the mood is let's go to the ecology transition. It will be it will create jobs and it will not increase costs. And this is not true. It will increase costs. We have to face it. And if the economies, the various economies which are in competition do not go at the same path, at the same speed, and here I mean typically the French and German economies, if one is doing big efforts when the other one is not only claiming to make efforts, it will impede the respective competitions. It will influence the respective competition between countries. When you see a country like our neighbor who plans to keep its coal plants open until 2038, that is 12 years before 2050, there is something which does not work. There is no adequacy between statements and speeches on one hand and the reality of the policies. So, Fabrice, you asked me what the academic world, of course, including universities, but also academies like ours should do. We should say the truth. The truth is that it has to be done and it will not be easy to do. And we have to face the challenge and we have to tell the stakeholders that it will not be easy.
Thanks, thanks, Dominique, for sharing this insight. And now we are going to be back to and welcome Richard Ovid. Richard, he is a former EU member during 22 years, representing UK, driving forces for sustainable Europe. And Richard is also the former chairman of International Integrated Reporting Council, dedicated a task force to converge the first layer of the convergence from the financial reporting, usually dry for all companies, to a sustainable reporting, let's say an integrating reporting, matching the CSR, corporate responsibility, social and responsibility in the same piece. This is the same task, in fact. Why making those in silo? You drive a lot in this field. We don't say those fields, but in this field, there is just one scene to set and to match the good piece together. Richard, we would like to highlight the regulation framework, the policy framework to be net zero. We have to communicate. Communication is a great tool, but let's use communication also first in the right direction when it comes to net zero. Not only pledges, but implement the good policies, because time is running. Time is running, yes. So please, Richard, let's introduce yourself briefly, and we will welcome you to share your point of view, your overview.
Well, good morning, Fabrice. Good morning to everyone. And I'm so proud to be part of this carbon pricing conference, Getting the Carbon Price Right. and properly inserted in the system, recognizing the importance of climate tech solutions is all absolutely integral to us being able to meet the net zero targets. And I'm delighted to bring my own contribution and expertise, but also to listen and to be part of a conference which is very much about driving forward our collective efforts in this field. As you mentioned, Fabrice, I had the honour of leading the International Integrated Reporting Council, this movement that is trying to bring sustainability reporting and financial reporting together for business, but not just together, to make it genuinely integrated, to understand that everything we do in business, everything that we do that has financial consequences, has consequences for the planet, for the environment, for biodiversity, and for other what we call multiple capitals too. And we stand at a moment of great opportunity, because the European Union today is updating the directive that I'm associated with, the non-financial reporting directive. Already, since that was passed in 2012, we've seen probably nearly 12,000 companies across the whole of the European Union report on their social and environmental impact, who had not been doing so at all before. It was, I hope and believe, a huge step forward. But I would be the first to accept that they also had huge shortfalls. It was a first attempt. It was innovating new ground. And we're now in a position where the climate emergency is even more urgent and perceived to be so. We're now in a situation where investors are demanding more and better information from companies on their environmental impact. And we're now in a situation where many in business themselves, many people in the audience for this conference, want to achieve a net zero target, want to achieve sustainability strategy, and are much more ready to support systems, including at the level of the European Union, for us to be able to do so. And so a new corporate sustainability reporting directive draft has been published by the European Commission within the last month. And I'm still privileged to be working in an advisory capacity on what that directive might say when it comes out of the European Parliament and the European Council, and in relation to new standards that for the first time are going to be associated with the directive, including standards on carbon itself. So these are very, very exciting moments. We've had 1,000 companies worldwide that have now made net zero pledges. Again, many in this audience. But what we've seen is that there is still a gap between those pledges, whether they're by countries or by companies, and how they are, the strategies of how they are to be enacted. So the European differences are going to ensure that now there will be alignment between what companies are asked to report on and the policy goals of the European Union itself, its Green Deal, and in particular, the 1.5 degree target coming from the Paris Agreement. And we're also going to see that the reports by companies for the first time are going to be verified. There's going to be an independent audit procedure. And I see this as a potential major step forward within the next 2 years. And lastly, this, Fabrice, in these introductory thoughts, regulation has its part to play, and I'm happy to discuss that with you and with my fellow panelists. But regulation only comes because there are demands from society, and good regulation only comes if it is effective. It actually makes a difference within the real world. And part of my contribution to this conference is also to talk about the politics of carbon and of climate change, and some of the difficulties that we had at the level of the European Union to get a good consensus, some of the opportunities now that we have to get a better consensus, and also looking at a conference which is primarily to a European audience, understanding that potential that we have with the huge movements in China, whatever people's views about the politics of China, and I have strong criticisms, I promise you, but China has moved immensely in terms of the climate change agenda. And now we see a change of policy in the United States too, in relation to coming back into Paris and potentially also moving on regulation on the sustainability performance of the company and the reporting of it. And so what that gives us is a huge global opportunity, Europe, India too, China, the United States, to get this agenda not just leading within the European Union, but across the whole of the globe. And the politics of that is something that excites me too. Fabrice.
On also an Asia China perspective with Professor Chaozo Chi. I do appreciate your perspective and the, how can we say, the best way to join forces, not only within a country or geo-economic zone, but to be inspired by different ways to be net zero. I would like now, yes, Professor Chaozo Chi, to, can we say, share a piece of work, or let's say a piece of your great work that you accomplished and already done, and all the, also the programs that you are in charge by through China regions, preparing this specific session. You mentioned that there is different pilots in China, and the different pilots inspire themselves in those regions. So this diversity is already done in China, and I would like probably, yes, to share with all of us your point of view now. China is going to run his net zero plan, and let you the floor to present the point you would like to address.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to share in terms of the China's carbon neutral target and what actions now China is doing. First of all, in last September 22, President Xi Jinping announced China will try to realize their carbon neutral target before 2060. And after the announcement, China's central government firstly do a lot of actions in terms of their top level design, in terms of the carbon neutral target. It's for example, it's strategy and roadmap and so on. And since this year, the local government required by the central government, every provincial government, every major city government now is doing their best to design their roadmap and their action plan in terms of how to realize the carbon neutral target. And every ministries and sectors and bigger companies, especially the state-owned companies, is also doing their best to design their planning and their project and action, and especially roadmap in terms of their carbon neutral. Yeah. And this is the first of all in terms of the carbon neutral action in China. And secondly, recent 3 months, the very hot topic or words in China is carbon neutral. Almost everyone, every institutes, they will talk about the carbon neutral. We have a joke that when friends meet, the first word is that carbon neutral. How about your carbon neutral? So I think this is a very, of course, it's a very good situation that more and more Chinese people and government they pay more attention about the carbon neutral and carbon reduction, and they try to take some actions. This is the first of all, and the measures such as the TV, newspaper, website, and internet. All of these measures, they take actively actions to try to report about the carbon neutral concept, actions, and the universities and their how to say and some institutes, they organize a lot of forums, conference meeting, and so on to discuss about the carbon neutral. So this is very hot topic in China now, and of course, China realized its carbon neutral target before the 2060 is a very big challenge for China, because it's very heavy economic structures and energy structures. So that means China must pay a lot of cost at the very high cost to transform from the high carbon economic structures and energy structure to the low carbon structures. That means the whole societies, maybe every people, especially some workers who working in their heavy or high carbon industries, they maybe will lose their job and try to find a new job in some green or new or low carbon industries or companies. So these are very heavy challenges, and how to arrange their transfer, their job or position from the high carbon industry to low carbon industry. This is a very heavy job because of the huge population of China, and of course, it's a very big opportunities for investment and economic development because of China's huge market and huge economies. So when it's transformed from the high carbon society or economy to the low carbon economy, the demand for low carbon or green investment is very, very huge. I think from my private point of view, since China started its reform and open policy in last century of 18, we have passed 40 years. China achieved a very big economic achievements. And I think the next 40s until 2016 is another new challenge and opportunity for China transfer to low carbon economy. Yeah, the investment will be very huge. And we think the public finance is very limited. What we need is a huge private investment and market-oriented investment in the low carbon project, low carbon product, low carbon service, low carbon solutions, and so on. So China will provide a very huge opportunities for the global investment. Yes, I think this is not a very good opportunity for China itself, but also for the whole global, especially the European Union, the US, the UK, and the rest of the world. I think in this field, China, between China and the European Union, United States, the UK, because of the European Union and the United States, UK have very advanced innovation, low carbon concept, low carbon innovation of institutions, low carbon technology, and so on. So in this field, we have a big opportunity to cooperate deeply for the carbon neutral. This is my point of view. Finally, I think for China itself, how to realize its carbon neutral target also is a very big challenge. But I think the three key points or factors is very, very important. First is that the market. If the market, including the carbon market, can provide a very strong demand for the low carbon technology, which will incentive or drive the low carbon technology innovation in China. And also the policy is very important, which will push or encourage the private companies or state-owned companies can invest their long-term R&D or innovation in terms of their low carbon technologies. So the carbon neutral target set a very stable and encouraging long-term target, which will give the investors and companies how to say the belief and confidence that they can make their demand to invest long-term for their low carbon technology and R&D. So the market, technology, policy, these three factors integrate together will help us to try to realize our carbon neutral target. And in addition, I want to add some words. Because China is a very big country and includes many different regions. The different regions, actually different provinces, their economic structure and restructure, their economic developing stage is very different. So China now is trying to considering for different regions, different local, we will try to use the different policy, different targets to push the different region to realize their carbon neutral target in different roadmap. I think this is very important. We cannot use the very thin standards or very rigid or thin policies for the different regions. I think this experience is also important for the global, because of global we have a different countries, different economic structure, energy structure, and developing stages. So we must consider different policies for the carbon neutral target. And finally, our whole global to realize its net zero. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Chao Zouqi, from this China perspective. And we know that the transformation for China is something which is important, and the concept also to take the challenge in the opportunity ways. And there are a lot to do, and a lot also to transform when it comes to China roadmap for low carbon economy. But we are very pleased to also know that China is really engaged in this direction for can we say like an inspiring from its different regions to inspire itself and inspire probably the rest of all the countries. I would like to welcome now Jean-Florent Elf from S&P. Jean-Florent, he is based in Paris, and I would like to have the complementary point of view, not only a national point of view or a broad point of view from the United Nations, driven by Miguel, to have a private point of view. When it comes to report on net zero target, the investors, the capital markets, the bank and insurance players are also the core engine of the economy. How can they provide the best tools for themselves? And at the end of the day, it will be also the best tool for their asset under management. So I'll let you present yourself, and very pleased to have you, Jean-Florent Elf, as also our sponsor today. So yes, the floor is yours, Jean-Florent.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fabrice. Hi everyone. We are very pleased to speak today and to give you some more insights. Indeed, we are S&P Global. We are, known as the leading credit rating agency. S&P is 4 divisions: S&P Ratings, S&P Market Intelligence, which is the data provider, and we also have S&P Platts focusing on commodities, and S&P Dow Jones indices. We have now tackled ESG, sustainability, and especially climate very serious. Yes, so I was saying that we work with both corporations and financial institutions. We actually, focus especially on climate, but also on broader ESG topics. What's challenging those days for our clients who are again financial institutions, governments, or companies is to find the right metrics, right? To find those standardized, harmonized metrics when it comes to measuring the carbon footprint, measuring net zero targets, measuring carbon price risk exposure, or even physical risk exposure, and so on. And so we, have always been very active in that field. So we actually, try to follow the TCFD recommendations and also the different initiatives in this area, such as, for example, the various net zero initiatives that were out there. And so, for example, if some of you see my screen, you see that you have here the possibility to see a cost to EBITDA ratio. So just to give you an example of what type of metrics are used by both companies and investors, and it's very important that the two speak the same language. Okay, we have embedded the IPCC scenarios, the International Energy Agency scenarios, the so-called Energy Technology Perspective scenarios, ETP, into the assessment. So just to give you an idea, we currently cover approximately 20,000 companies, okay, which represent 99% of global market capitalization. And for each of these companies, we track their carbon price risk exposure in the context of each business activity they operate in and each country they operate in. And we based on especially IRENA projections, we, forecast a future carbon price exposure to which companies are exposed in 2030, in 2040, in 2050, across several time horizons and across several carbon price scenarios. When it comes to the trajectory of companies, there is, some of you may be aware that there is two groups of sectors, okay? So there is those sectors which are deemed to be carbon intensive sectors and for which there is a decarbonization pathway expressed per unit of production. So for example, utilities, tons of CO2 per megawatt hour, cement, tons of CO2 per tons of cement, and so on and so on. And this is what we call everybody call the SDA approach, sectoral decarbonization approach. Okay, and in this regard, you have what I'm showing you, by the way, is the ERAF report. You have several types of sectors falling in there. So what I'm saying is that what we see ongoing now is that when investors and financial institutions want to measure the trajectory of the portfolio, they tend to have a multi-sector approach, meaning that they want to capture the trajectory of those big sectors with high carbon intensity, such as automobiles, utilities, steel, cement, airlines, as well as the other sectors, because there are more and more companies across all the sectors that publish targets. And because the big challenge nowadays is to rely on the targets set by companies, and those targets, even though they could be SBTi certified, they could be in different units. Okay, they could be in absolute terms, in intensity terms, and therefore we have to harmonize that. And in the absence of targets, we can even look at the capex. So there is a lot going on, especially since 3 years, in the development of such metrics. Especially in Europe, but also in Japan, for example, GPIF publish, the Japanese pension fund publish such results. More and more institutional investors across the world actually show their climate trajectory. Some of them show their carbon price risk exposure or even physical risk exposure. And so we really are in a very interesting phase where everybody is trying to speak the same language, to measure things in following the same metrics or indicators.
Florent, for sharing this perspective. I would like to ask you, yes, let's say by your side, Jean-Florent, and then turning to all our panelists, from decision makers, that it means from boardrooms, and when it comes to civil society implementation, let's call it like a board of the street. How can we manage the implementation from the boardrooms to the board in the street, that it means the civil society, and reverse? What could be the governance, the good balance, not only by being net zero, but by taking the right decision to be net zero? In the one side, there is commitment, we can say sector per sector, with highest standards. And where we were preparing this session, we have highlighted also Richard Ovid, that we have to push the minimum standard higher. And I would like to start with you, Jean-Florent, and with you also, Richard Clark, by this. For a connection to be net zero and carbon pricing, it comes with to have the best equilibrium between corporate, let's say also public institutions, public policies, but at the end of the day, this is the consumer citizen. The carbon pricing is also a part of the consumer citizen. How can we better align a net zero commitment in the two sides of the board, from the boardroom to, let's say, the board of the street or the civil society? For your perspective, Jean-Florent, from a private perspective, and then let's come with Richard Clark to engage more this conversation.
Yeah. So it's very important to re-emphasize the concept and the carbon budget concept, right? So you know that there is a defined amount of CO2 that we should not exceed to be in line with the 1.5 degree scenario. And this carbon budget, could be then allocated by sector, and then within the sector by companies, or it could be allocated by country. So it's very important to have that in mind. You know what I mean? To understand the different concepts, indeed. And I would say that. As I said, it's very important to speak the same language between the policymakers and the different stakeholders, companies, industry boards, like you said. And that's why I emphasize the fact that the board members at companies need to monitor, to be able to monitor and report on very harmonized and straightforward indicators, right? So TCFD, for example, has helped the board of directors a lot, right? Because it provided the framework to understand, to make the link between the governance, the strategy, and the risk management and the metrics and targets. So I think following that would be ideal in any net zero let's say initiatives.
Jean-Florent, I agree with you that reporting is absolutely vital. TCFD is a vital tool in this, and the role of the central banks. We've seen activity in Europe and, of course, in the UK too. What we, I think, need most of all is strong and stable carbon pricing mechanisms, which can include ETS and in some cases national carbon pricing schemes, but that the movement of the price should be predictable to some extent and stable, that the transition from a low price to a high price should not be something that happens very, very quickly. And I do have some concern, and I think others are feeling this too, that it is on one hand excellent that ETS has gone up to 50 euros, but that is also having side effects now that will require other mechanisms to bring in. And that is because we have gone from a very low price of many years at 5 euros to this new mechanism which has delivered a strong carbon price. And if this happens too fast, then it will create secondary problems. I think we also have to realize that many countries are not going to proceed at the same pace. We were hearing a very interesting understanding of the difference, for example, between Europe and Southeast Asia. I agree with that we have very different structures, indeed, different grids, different capacity and capabilities to implement things. And this requires different carbon pricing, in my view, horses for courses, as we say in England, in order to meet those demands. So it is not necessarily the case, for example, that the decarbonisation immediately goes to zero. What we need to have is countries that have long industrial and high net GDP per capita to start rapidly transitioning out of coal, for example, to allow others that want to develop, Kosovo is an example, so that they have an opportunity to enjoy the economic wealth that many other countries have had. And I think as a chemical engineer, in thinking about these things, one of the concerns that I have, that I see in this movement, is that we are very rapidly saying that fossil fuels have no further role to play. What I would say is fossil fuel emissions have no further role to play, but fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, has great potential, I believe, in terms of hydrogen, both in terms of what they call blue hydrogen, maybe other forms too. And if we can invest and develop those technologies, some of which require carbon capture, then it will give us an easier transition than if we try to immediately all go for renewables in the first step, because I don't think that that's going to happen. And what will happen is we have a very disaggregated global economy, and that will increase tensions rather than reconcile tensions at the moment.
I agree with what Richard has just said a bit about hydrogen, including that, which I think is an essential part of the mix if we're to get to net zero in 2050. And I agree with what you just said about the importance of predictability in the carbon price. But I would say that many analysts say that rather than at 50 euros, that it's probably between 100 and 200 euros if we're going to meet the target. So whilst accepting we need to find a way of getting there in a managed pathway to minimise the negative consequences, I do think that we should note the big chasm there is between where carbon pricing is today, the shortfalls of the European emissions trading system, and I was in the European Parliament when it was passed, so I again fully acknowledge that, as well as where we need to go for the future. Now, Fabrice, our moderator, your original question, I think what you say about the boardroom is really important. What we know from the research in Europe, the Alliance for Corporate Transparency, is at the moment only a minority of companies take their sustainability strategy or even their sustainability report to the board level or have board arrangements for overseeing sustainability issues. That has got to change. If this is as urgent as we all know it is in this conference, then it cannot be relegated to simply being a management issue within the company. And then boards themselves, and by the way, the Mazars board agenda survey shows that a big majority of board members today say that sustainability is an important interest, but also say that it's not well represented amongst board members and that they don't feel they have the skills and competencies to manage it. So that does all need to change. And one more aspect at the board level is that boards need to ensure that the remuneration packages for their executives reflect their sustainability targets. And a number of companies are doing this, but we need to see all companies doing so. And then Fabrice, your question about the population, the citizens, and what's their role in all of this. You know, I'm a big fan of the European standards because they're going to meet overcome a big hurdle in how we make progress, in that they're going to empower and enable investors to really drive change, and companies will listen to what the investors say and will want the better access to capital and the cheaper access to capital that the transition to sustainable finance is representing. But the new standards also have to reflect what citizens want. You know, one of the great principles of integrated reporting is that reports are concise and understandable. And let's face it, the hundreds of pages and the small print in many company reports today do not give genuine access to stakeholders, to citizens. It's about compliance. Yet, as we know, citizens are investors. The big majority of institutional investment funds are pensions paid for by all of us, certainly within Europe, the vast majority of us again. And what I predict, but also what I hope for in the years to come, is that the new standards, the new forms of reporting, of openness, of transparency about corporate behaviour and sustainability will actually be accessible and understandable and therefore accountable to citizens, and that citizens can easily choose not simply which products they buy, but where their pensions are invested in order to achieve sustainable outcomes. And if we don't do that, we've seen the warning signs in France itself. We've seen the Gilets jaunes. We've seen the pushback on changes that were genuinely intended to meet sustainable goals, but which didn't take the population with them. And therefore, it's important that when we talk in Paris about the concept of just transition, when we talk about the concept that's in the UN is widely referred to as climate justice, that as we plan for this net zero future, as we plan to defeat climate change, that we take populations with us and that we make citizens active in the process by which we do so.
If that's the case, I'm happy to do that. And I just wanted to echo what both Richards are saying here. That
yes,
first of all,
sure, Johan, please.
Okay, thank you. That we're seeing a very encouraging global effort, and as I mentioned, Southeast Asia, there are several planned schemes on carbon pricing in those countries. I think, as Richard said, that the expectations on regarding the pace with which those can deliver in the future, we have to be really realistic about that. But just quickly going back also to the boardroom question, what is coming with the Paris Agreement, which is emphasized very strongly with the Paris Agreement, is transparency. And we see also this as something that is developing in the private sector. So it's more and more transparency, both required by the Paris Agreement, but also bottom up from the private sector. So if we can get a match of communication regarding this transparency, that would be great. For companies to understand their emissions and how they can reduce them and how they can be more energy efficient, etc., is also the basis for their own benefits in participating in carbon pricing schemes. So just one point here is that communication will be very important from both the policymakers' side, but also from the companies. And it's about, and I think there's a few studies now showing these lessons learned, that communicating the benefits, communicating visions of low carbon future, not just communicating we're going to put a price on you, and also communicating to the society that when we get revenues from carbon pricing, we're going to put that back to society. So those parts of communication, I think, will be very important in some sort of exchange between society and private sector and government. So, thanks.
Yes, we are going to bridge all those things that you have tailor-made, each on your side from your backgrounds, when it comes to be transparent or, let's say, accountable between the two boards we have designed, the boardroom of the private sector, let's say also the public sector, and the boardrooms of the consumer citizen. Aligning those three layers in the same layer, in fact, to design or a sort of governance when it comes to be net zero. Do you think that we have to communicate, that you mentioned, Johan, to communicate also from public or private organization on the website of each organization, have to now to go deeper and to be realistic and compatible with the target and what they do by their own strategy, to highlight on their website their carbon footprint. When it comes to be net zero, it's all about to be accountable and transparent. Let's say this as a broad question, an open question to all of you, to say, do you think now it's the time that all organizations have to show up on their website their carbon footprint, that we could monitor, I don't know in the real time, but update in very quickly in each report to say, it's not only about the, how can we say, the price they have on the market, the stock option, and so on, but to say we are accountable to be net zero. There is another championship today. It's not to have the best price on stock exchanges, is to have the best transparency when it comes to be net zero. And beyond this, there is all the standardization, sector per sector, countries per countries. But now, if we have to set the scene to be practical for the next 2 decades, at least, to transform all our economy, it's very important. So it's an open question, an open discussion, like a do tank process. And I will be very happy from all of you to have a word or to send a message or an input on this scheme. Yes, probably. Miguel, do you want to say something? Yes, Miguel.
Thank you. Yes, I actually have to, unfortunately, leave you in a few minutes. So thank you for asking me to go first. Maybe from our side, from the UNFCCC Secretariat side, let's say that the private sector action is something that we encourage and something that we follow on, right? We keep an eye open for what's happening there, and we try to support through different initiatives that we have in place. So private sector action is very important, and it's key to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. That's it. And we are very interested in it. However, the opinion that I express now is it's not an official opinion. It's more the personal opinion on the role of the private sector. And definitely, I think that by this time it is already late that companies, for those companies that are not reporting publicly on their footprint and on their plans to address that footprint, which is even more important. So I think as a matter of transparency towards the general public, governments, the investors that you have discussed already a lot, the important role they have, it should be already a standard that companies make public completely the information of their footprint, and again, the strategy to address that footprint, ideally also the risks that they see in the transition to whatever they need to change to address that footprint. Again, this is a matter of responsibility that any board of any company should be already addressing with priority. How is climate change impacting or going to impact in the near future your business model, and what are you doing to address it? So yes, I think it's transparency is the key to credibility and to trust. Without transparency, everything else that we do lacks. It's basically useless. It will lack on buying and support. So transparency is key, and definitely companies should be reporting already on this. I think we will see more and more requirements, both official and non-official, to make that information public. But hopefully companies that are already doing it or already preparing to do it will be on a much better position than those that are lagging. We recently saw what happened at Exxon in the election of the board recently. So something like this, both actions coming internally from the companies and also externally, will be forcing companies to present their footprints and their strategies. So yes, with that, again, this is my personal opinion. That doesn't reflect necessarily the opinion of the Secretariat. But with that, I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you. I need to leave to the next commitment, but we see you in the afternoon for another session.
Exactly.
Thank you for this.
Bye.
Thanks, Miguel. See you next. Yes, let's back to this last but not least question. Probably yes, we shall. We've got some few minutes after to conclude this one series session. But yes, let's run this open discussion on this way. In a very, very short message, I will ask to all the speakers to have a quick analysis, a fast-track analysis on this point. How can we be more transparent from public and private organizations when it comes to be net zero?
I think to your original question, should it be on the website? Yes, of course. You wouldn't expect me to disagree with that as a complete champion of transparency. But of course, that won't be useful unless we can agree standards. Because if for one company it's measured as the company alone, and for another company they do the full value chain, these are not comparable pieces of information. What we know is that of the top 160 companies that impact upon climate change, that of those, 43% have net zero targets, but only 10% have scope 3 emissions. And that shows why we need to move on comparability as well as transparency. Then we come to, of course, the process of standardization. And it's quite crucial that we get the information right, yes, but it's way beyond Fabrice. I'm much more ambitious than you, if I can tease you in that way, in that I support the European proposals that all of this goes in the company sustainability report for 40,000 plus companies around Europe. And I guess that would be almost every company watching would fall into that category. And that it will be fully digitized and tagged, and that the information will be on the single European portal, which is going to be created for company reporting to make it accessible in terms of the comparison between the reports. And to be honest, folks, that is going to happen. I believe this is going to happen, and that reporting is going to start in less than 2 years from now. So I urge companies to address that if you're not already doing so. And finally, Fabrice, your point about, is it more important to have the high stock price, the high rating on the in relation to the stock exchanges, or the better transparency on carbon? The great thing about the transition to a sustainable financial system, and I know Jean-Florent will absolutely agree with this, is that we're going to do both. And that we now see through the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative that exchanges throughout Europe and the world are adopting listing rules on sustainability. We now see the massive growth in sustainability indices like the Dow Jones Sustainable Index that S&P are associated with, in which companies are vying very greatly in order to get themselves up the ranking. And we're going to end that dichotomy between companies choosing, believing that they've got to choose between what's sustainable and what is best in terms of maximizing finance, to understand that if they believe in long-term value creation for the company itself, they cannot afford an unsustainable future. And what we say at this conference is they cannot afford an unsustainable present either. I'm back again this afternoon. I'll be listening to my fellow panelists, but thank you for listening to me.
So I would just like to add to that, Richard. The Richards agree again that it's a sustainable index, maybe a sort of a donut economy index of the true impacts and values that a company creates is very, very important. And it's not just the net dollars. The other thing that always strikes me is company reports. They include CSR and so on in their appendices as an additional, as a requirement to reporting. But really, like a good newspaper that is telling the truth, that it should be readable, communicatable, and not have this sort of climate department at the very end. But like many newspapers now, they combine climate into every story, whether it is sport or whether it is investment or finance or government. These are activities crossing all the sectors. And I think reporting in that way could be a lot better than it is. And that's really all I have to say.
We are going probably, yes, to close in a very, very short the panel and to, yes, probably to have your voice, Dominique, about the way to be much more transparent. And
well, to a large extent, I would agree with what has been said by the other panelists, and certainly nobody would disagree for getting more transparency. Nevertheless, I would like to make a warning and not to fall in the trap of name and blame, name and shame. It has been alluded to Exxon. We have the same with Total in France. There are many citizens which are very much criticizing oil companies. But nevertheless, they put oil in their cars and they are buying this oil. So it is too simple to put the blame on the companies. They do what they can. There is not enough infrastructure to convert all the vehicle fleet to electricity. And in many countries, electricity is not decarbonized. So all that has to be done together, and only blaming companies because they have emissions is not an answer.
This double view, it's about not only making some constraint to try to move core business line moves in the right direction, it's also about incentivizing the new sectors to help them take also their part or their piece of market, but it's only about not only about the piece of market, it's about a piece of to be net zero globally. I would like to thank you, yes, Dominique, if you have to leave, but you can stay with us at least for the other session. It's a pleasure to have the French Academy of Technology part of us and a partner also. So thanks again, Dominique. I would like to come with Satish Gupta from this question. Accountability, standardization are not very far. For your side, in a very short perspective, how can you fix the level of the standards we need? I say the standards with an S because we know that there will have, as carbon market price, many kind of carbon markets. So it will also have many kind of standardizations. So when it comes with this, do you think that, and it will be also the question for Jean-Florent to pass the way in this, to be from standardization of industries to standardization of carbon accountability. What could be the pathway from industrial standardizations to standardize the carbon accounting itself?
The question is very much clear to me. Right now, see, the standards which are framed by different countries have a different role to play at different times. So standards do help in making the regulations for a country. For example, there would be some regulations controlling the GHG emissions from country to country, from scheme to scheme, sector-wise also. When these standards are there, the regulations would be in place. And these regulations and policies, for example, climate policy, they will take a help from the standards. And standards are there to guide. So my submission is that before we make anything mandatory, like mandatory declaration of GHG emissions or footprint by a company and putting it in the website, that would be a kind of voluntary approach. The regulation should not make it mandatory kind of thing, so that the company are bound to put that kind of thing, because it's a market strategy which will ultimately going to come, and the market would decide which company is having which kind of carbon footprint, and they would like to close those companies which are not declaring their carbon footprint at the website. So it's a right kind of approach that we always consult the standards which are in place. Maybe it's a national standard or international standards, but they should not be a barrier of kind of thing for putting all kind of cap on the system which are in place. So this is my submission. Thank you.
Sharing this piece, I would like to have the Jean-Florent on this question about standardizing the carbon accounting from a corporate perspective.
Yes, it's very important. And actually, so the more we standardize the different metrics to report on, the better. Because first, what we have seen in several jurisdictions is that if there is a regulation requiring mandatory disclosure, then we see that the companies or the organizations that are impacted by those regulations start to take actions, start to decarbonize, start to, it has an impact on the performance. So disclosure is a first step towards having an impact. Okay, and yeah, standardization. For carbon emissions, there is already a standard, right, of framework, which is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which has been used for decades by both investors and companies. Now we need indeed a similar framework for other things, like how to measure the trajectory of organizations and companies, and DCs and several bodies are working on it. Especially, there's BTI, CDP, WRI, S&P, and other players. So yeah, so I emphasize the importance of disclosure and the importance of speaking the same language. For environment and climate, we have the chance that we all express things in the same unit, okay, tons of CO2, which may not be the case for other ESG topics. So that's why it's working, but there is still work to be done.
Thanks in the same time all our panelists. We are just some minutes ahead on the timing with this very rich conversation, and probably also to have in a very short also term the China perspective with Professor Chaozhou Qi. It's not only about standardization, it's about also on the process and how we could run or have in common the engineering of the process. It's about timing, it's about also avoiding side effect, and the process and the quality of the process is very important. How can we, you share with us by a China perspective, and then we are going to close after this very, again, rich panel. Yes, please, Professor.
Okay, thank you. I'm an economics professor, so from the economics theory and our experiences in practice to setting up the carbon market, because the patterns. I think the information transparency is very important for the policy effectiveness and the investment decision, because the information are symmetry and uncertainty. This is a two very important affecting factors in the carbon market and the investor decision. And in terms of the information symmetry in the market, between the local government, between the government and the companies, between the investment and the companies, all of these levels exist. The information asymmetry. So how to deal with information asymmetry is very important for the carbon market and the carbon price, as well as their policy effectiveness. Just all of the speakers mentioned the information or the emission data transparencies. I think it's very important for the investment, especially the private investment in the company and in the market. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Professor Chiaozouqi, for also bringing a piece of work and concept and thinking to go ahead in this panel. You have seen, I'm going to close the discussion for this morning series, that carbon pricing, carbon accounting, net zero are all connected directly. So I would like to thank all my panelists, my distinguished panelists for this morning, dedicated to the series 1. We are here in Paris time zone, and we are very pleased to welcome you just in 1 hour at 2:30 p.m. Paris time, and hope that all around the world you have just catch the piece of concept to be net zero, a piece of understanding from a private and the public sector when it comes also with accountability, when it comes with standardization, sector per sector, with a diverse point of view of geographic zone. So thanks a lot, my panelists, for this morning, and let's back this afternoon with another series. Some of you will be there. It will be all around implementing carbon, not only carbon pricing, but the Paris Agreement itself within international trade agreement for a lower carbon footprint on the commerce, international commerce. And we are going to connect this concept also with the back office of the international commerce, which is the supply chain. How having a low carbon supply chain, and it will be very interesting to understand the concept in this angle. So thanks a lot all, and just to have a rest, and let's back on the afternoon. Thanks.